This is Unrendered on IKtv. You can follow us at iConcepts. My guest on this edition is the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves. Prime Minister, is 2014 going to be a deficit budget?
Yes, we are going to have a deficit on the current account, slightly larger than last year, just by about 2.7 million Eastern Caribbean dollars. Now, the deficit which we are projecting on the current account is manageable.
How do you intend to manage it? And let me just put another question to you, or another comment. You're criticized for year-on-year producing deficit budgets, in contrast to what the NDP says they were in a surplus situation.
Well, you know, as I was just explaining to you, because I come back to the same issues. Mm-hmm. If you do not spend on certain necessary and desirable programs, you can have a surplus on your current account. The last budget, which Arnim Eustace left for me, the last estimates, had a surplus on the face of it of $401,000. But guess what? He was expecting to collect $12 million in revenues from selling passports, which we discontinued. Mm-hmm. So immediately you would have seen that on the face of it, you would have had a deficit in excess of $11 million.
Right.
So let's be real about these numbers.
So how are you going to manage the deficit? And what are the dangers? What are the dangers of carrying a deficit budget?
There are two ways in which you manage a deficit on the current account. One, in the implementation of your budget, you make savings. Mm. In other words, you're very careful. You're very prudent. You're a businessman. Normally, when you have a budget, you try to see if you can save between 5 to 7% of your expenditure in any one particular year. This is what you budget to spend.
Right. But you look for savings along the way.
But you look for savings along the way. And we do make the savings along the way. The second way, of course...
savings should not be confused with austerity. I mean...
No, they should not be confused with austerity.
Because we have to make this very clear.
We have to make this... Because I'm interested in being prudent. Mm. And we are being prudent with the government funds. Look, I take it in a personal way. The increase of the salary of the Prime Minister and ministers since 2001 is the aggregate increase is about in the region of 30%. Mm-hmm. For the senior public servants, the teachers, the police, it is in excess of 60%, more than double. So I put myself in the mix to show you comparatively how relatively small increases we have taken as politicians compared to the public service and all the categories of workers. The facts are there, and I can demonstrate them for you. But please accept my word on it. So now, so that you save in the operation of the budget, and you have to finance that deficit where you don't save it, either from soft loans, or there are, during the course of the year, you may get budget support.
Do you get grants? You get concessionary grants?
Not grants on the capital side, but you will get budget support on the current account side.
In the whole, when we talk in deficit and surplus here, and I'm not an economist, so let me just put this straight up.
Yes.
But there's the thing of fiscal gap.
Yes.
What is the fiscal gap really? And in terms of a definition, I'm going to ask you, and what is our fiscal gap?
Well, the overall deficit is what you would need to be looking at, not just the deficit on the current account.
Right.
Because when you have the deficit on the current account, you then have to proceed and find, in our own context, about $100 million for the amortization of the debt and sinking fund. Now, remember this. If you have a debt which you are amortizing and you borrow to pay off that very debt, and if you get the rate of interest lower than what the debt was initially, you're ahead of the game.
Right.
The problem comes in is if you have to borrow to pay your salaries, or in fact to pay the interest on your debt, not the amortization of the principal or the payment into the sinking fund to take care of the bonds.
Right.
And this is why I say to you, we manage our debt carefully. This is why St. Vincent and the Grenadines, our debt to GDP is 70-odd%.
How significant of an indicator is that? We'll get back to this fiscal gap, but in as much as you brought it up, how significant an indicator is that? Because your economy, in essence, is albeit growing, but not significantly. Okay. In fact, you've had 3 years of negative growth.
Yes.
Okay. But
2008 to 2010 inclusive.
Now let's contrast that with a place like Barbados, that I believe has a higher debt to GDP ratio than St. Vincent. But yet their economy may be showing growth, or may have shown growth when ours have not.
No, actually our economy has grown more than the economy of Barbados over this period.
Over this 3-year period that you have experienced
over the 5-year period of the global crisis, 2008 to now and continuing.
So perhaps Barbados is a bad example. The example I want to use is they might be a growing economy, but yet the debt to GDP ratio is worse than, not as good as ours.
Yes, but you have to be careful with that, because you would have to look at what is the debt profile. What are the terms of the debt? Are they long-term debt at very low rates of interest? For instance, when we get a loan from the Alba Bank, 20 years at 2%.
At 2%.
It's a gift.
Right.
When we get money from Petrocarib, 1% for 20 years, it's a gift. Now, if you were to go and borrow commercially, and what is to be noted is that we have not borrowed commercially. All we have done, the most we have paid for on any debt for the central government is when we go and raise bonds, and you pay 7%. We go on the regional government securities market for short-term borrowings. We roll over $75 million in 3 tranches of 25 each.
Right.
They are 90-day treasury bills, short-term instruments. Under the NDP, they used to pay 6.5% for that in Kingstown. But I go on the regional government securities market and get 3.5%.
Right.
That again is part of your prudence in managing your fiscal situation. Now, if you have, like how St. Kitts and Nevis had a high
debt to
GDP, the moment of reckoning came when they had to go on an IMF program. But St. Kitts, their per capita GDP is much higher than us.
Right.
Whether their standard of living is higher than us is an entirely different business altogether. But they have had to take certain kinds of measures in order to bring that in line to what is realistic. If you allow it to get out of hand, you have problems down the road.
Right. So let's get back to the question of fiscal gap, because for my own interest, I also want to understand this concept. And is our fiscal gap widening? Is that the trend?
you can have a fiscal gap which widens moderately over a short term, which has happened, but which you have over the medium term, the plan of narrowing the fiscal gap, which is what we have presented.
Right. So essentially, you're saying that the gap is widening, but over the medium to long term.
Very narrowly.
Yes. So
Yes.
but yet it's widening. But over the medium to long term, there's a plan to pull it back.
Absolutely. And that is what is in place. Because look, you take, for instance, this year, we went to the Parliament for close to $200 million in supplementary appropriation for the airport.
To the airport.
You will see repeated in this estimate almost $100 million, because it's the accounting. If you haven't spent all of what you appropriated in a particular year, in order to spend it at all, you have to put it back in the subsequent year. So these monies which are coming for the airport for 2014 are not new monies, but the rollover from the existing monies. Now, what are those monies? We have a $10 million loan from the Exim Bank in Taiwan.
Right.
That's just about 2%. We have $2.5 and $5.4 million loan from the Bank of Nova Scotia. One is supported by the Export Credit Agency in Canada, another one in the United States.
Right.
To buy Canadian goods and services and to buy American goods and services. Because of that, we got at low rates of interest. We could have gone LIBOR, 6-month LIBOR plus.
Right.
Or we could go for a fixed rate. I just signed yesterday for the first of the loans a fixed rate of 3.5% because LIBOR is climbing back up.
Right.
So to be on the safe side.
Yeah, you fix your interest.
Yes. Yeah. Now, in the case of the $40 million from the Alba Bank, that's 2% monies, just like the Taiwanese monies, over 20-year periods. But I have to build the airport because that is a strategic necessity and desirability. Why? Look, Tony, we have an economy of 100,000 people. You get about 100,000 tourists who come in. I'm not talking about those which come in as on the cruise ships. I'm talking stopover visitors.
People stay over, yes.
So you're producing goods and services for 200,000 people. Your domestic population, another 100,000. Now, if you can go in a very short period of time to bring in 300,000 people, it means therefore that you're producing goods and services for 400,000 people.
So your airport is one of your strategies for growth.
Because the point is this, Tony. Not only the way in which we have to create wealth is to create wealth for people who are overseas. We send the goods and services to them, we sell them, or we bring them here to sell them the goods and services. Right. And of course, you have to do both.
Prime Minister, we're at the end of this section. When we come back to our next section, as much as you brought up the airport, and as much as we're talking about the estimates, I'm going to ask you, what is the airport costing the taxpayer of St. Vincent and the Grenadines? Because that seems to be a point that comes up all the time. And so I want to get some clarity on that immediately when we come back.
Fine.
This is Unrendered on IKtv. My guest is Dr. the Honorable Ralph E. Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. More with the Prime Minister when we come back.